So our next presenter is Brian Blumhagen, General Manager of New Modern Concepts in Iowa Falls. Brian received his undergraduate and MBA degree from Iowa State University. He's worked in the pork industry his whole life. For the last couple of years, he has been the general manager for New Modern Concepts, and throughout that time has managed hundreds of new hog finishing barns, as well as remodeling some current hog barn projects. So with that, let's welcome Brian.
Thank you. Really quickly, so New Modern, what we are is we're a general contractor based out of Iowa Falls. We operate in the ag industry and primarily in the swine industry. So we would build all of the types of facilities in the swine industry and remodel as well. I want to do three things today, or I was asked to do three things. First one is talk about what should you inspect in a barn, whether you are maybe looking at purchasing an existing asset, what to look at, or if you're an owner-operator or just an operator of a barn, what should you look at and on that facility when you're inspecting it. The second thing is we'll talk about those repairs. So if you do have some maintenance or remodeling that needs to occur, everybody kind of wants to know what that's going to cost. I will preface that by saying the pricing right now is pretty dynamic. I don't know what Trump's tweeted out this afternoon, but these prices could have changed since I put the presentation together. And then I'll finish up talking about new construction, talk about some things to consider if you are in the market to build a new barn. What are some things that you might want to think about doing if you're going to do that? And then I'll finish up and talk about, everybody wants to know what's that going to cost. And for reference, my photos and a lot of what I will reference will be a finishing type barn, just because that's the volume of barns we have out there. But obviously sow farms have slats and attics and fans and ventilation, and same with nurseries. So, but I will be talking about it primarily from a finishing barn perspective. All right, so the first thing you want to inspect, really important, is your attic. Again, if time isn't of the essence, a good time of the year to do this is in the fall. You'll need a step ladder, a flashlight, and a hammer. And the fall, just because it's the most pleasant time to be up in the attic, you sure wouldn't want to do one this week, unless you want to lose a lot of weight. And the other nice thing about the fall is it's prior to going into wintertime. We saw quite a few snow load failures this winter on older barns. So obviously, it was a really hard winter in the Midwest, a lot of snow. And so if you've got issues in that barn, the fall's a good time to identify those and take care of those before you load it up with 2 or 3 foot of snow in January or February. So when you go in that barn, what you're going to want to focus on is what we would call the transition areas. So this would be anywhere that you're going to have cold air and hot air mixing. So your soffits, your ridge vent, and then on your right above your insulation line, because again, where we have hot air and cold air transitioning is where we get our moisture and our condensation, and that's what causes corrosion. And that's really what we're up there looking for. So again, you're going to have to get in the attic. You really need to walk it. The only exception to that would be if you climbed up in there and you saw this after you poked your head in. You don't have to get in the attic. Just climb back down. Call me. My number will be at the end of this presentation. And seriously, we see that sort of stuff. You can sit here and laugh, but it's real. So what you're going to want to look at is those transition areas. This is your ridge truss plates. You can see there's a little bit of surface rust on there. A lot of these barns were built in the 90s that are starting to fail. Had the G60 galvanization rating on them. And what that is it's the amount of zinc that's applied per square foot in an ounce form. So G60 simply means there was 0.6 ounces of zinc sprayed on that truss plate. And so the higher the G rating, the more zinc and the more resistant it would be to corrosion, okay? So to put it in perspective, the industry's moved on from that, and a lot of people are putting in the 90s, and the one we do a lot of 185s on our truss plates now, so they have a lot longer life. But if you see a lot of surface rust, like on that one, you'd want to hit it with a hammer. If it disintegrates, you got a problem, call somebody. That's what happened here. Again, these are your ridge. You can see it there. They're all failing. And that's something that's actually pretty easy to fix in this state. Where it gets really challenging is this lower picture on the right. And that was a snow failure we saw this winter. Combination of things that we think happened here, primarily one, the amount of snow that was put on that building, and two, we think the lower cord truss plates had corroded. And what had happened, or we believe it happened there, is this insulation, when these barns were built, it should have been blowing in at about 12 inches thick. That gives you about an R30 insulation factor. And over time, that cellulose or that fiberglass will compress, and it exposes that lower cord truss plate, and it's right where that moisture is transitioning. So those rusted out, put a lot of load on it, and this is what we end up with. So that's what you're going to want to look at. The other thing maybe to pay attention to is what the nail and the screw pattern were. If you see a lot of missed nails or screw patterns, your installer, your framer probably didn't do a very good job, and it's probably not at the structural rating that was planned when it was built. So that'd be something else to look at. All right, moving down in, your next really big area to focus on these older barns would be the pits. Obviously, it goes without saying we don't ever get in that pit unless you're equipped appropriately and know what you're getting into. But what you're going to want to look at and get your eyes on, and again, I'd highlight, you can have a professional come in and inspect this for $500. It's a good investment if you're looking at buying a barn, or you've got a barn that you're really starting to get nervous about what's going on with those slats. And they've got equipment to look on the bottom side. But where we see a lot of failures would be right here. There's a beam pocket failure. That's what holds your slat up. It walked out or it sloughed off, and that beam collapsed in. And your beam and your columns and your beam pockets are going to be your bigger failures, because when you lose that, you lose multiple slats. Individual slat failure is not as big a deal, obviously, to contend with. So we would really focus a lot of time. So this is looking at a column. When this one was set, it wasn't centered great. We'd like to get at least 3 inches on that column when those are set in a new construction situation. But what we're worried about is over time, will that slough off that concrete? And what would be even worse is if you went to the column to the right of that, and if you saw a big gap so that column could actually move. If everything's tight in there, that's actually a better situation. If you lost a portion of this, it's tight enough that beam's not going to move anywhere. Another thing you wouldn't want to see is rebars exposed. The rebar and the concrete are doing two things. The concrete's providing the compression force, and your steel and your rebar is keeping it from pulling apart. So they're really working together. Once you get the rebar exposed, it's just a matter of time. That's a really corrosive environment. It's going to eat it up, and eventually you're going to have a problem. And generally speaking, if you think you've got problems on the surface, when you stick a camera under there and look at that from the bottom side, it's going to look a lot worse. So if you're seeing something on the top that's concerning, there's probably something underneath it that is even worse. Okay. So moving outside, something that gets overlooked a lot and doesn't get enough credit is these observation tubes. So at least in the state of Iowa, the DNR requires us to put perimeter tile around the base of these pits. And we can do one of three things to get rid of that water. We can sump it out and onto the surface, or we can hook to a tile, or we can daylight it on the property. If we hook to a tile and daylight it, we got to have a gate valve on there to shut it off. But a lot of times people don't, it's built like that and nobody ever looks in it. But if you got a sump pump, that needs to be checked on a regular basis. Just to give you some reference, this is a barn we built last year, and everybody knows what the weather was like in Iowa. Right after we framed that barn, we got a 6-inch rain event in less than 24 hours. This site in particular had a sump pump. You can see the electrical panel there, and we didn't obviously have the sump pump hooked up yet. But in less than about 12 hours, these guys sent us a picture. They're our installers, and they're touching the ceiling, and they're of the height that should never happen. And they thought it was kind of funny. We were pretty nervous about the whole thing. And that floor had come up almost 6 inches. So it was getting right to the point where if it had come up much more, it would have dropped those slats in the building. It would have been a mess. So what you're going to want to do when you look down that tube is, one, is there a lot of water in there or not? If it's a pump, is it running? If it's dry, that's great. That's what we'd want. The other time to really pay attention to that is when you're hauling and getting your pit pumped out. Because as long as the manure level is the same are higher than whatever the water level is in the outside of the barn, you're not creating hydraulic pressure. It's when you get that out of balance. So if you looked in that tube prior to pumping and there's 4 foot of water and you suck that down to less than a foot, that's a problem. You're going to put pressure on that and that floor can come up. So it's something that doesn't get talked about, but it's really important. Fan and pit covers, Dr. Ramirez touched on that. Not a fan of them, not because they weren't a good idea. It's just nobody maintains them. They're always full of manure, dust. I always see the covers pulled away from the barn, so there's a gap and the air is just circulating around the pit cover. So it's a big opportunity if you really are struggling with ventilation. Clean that thing up, get it tight to the barn, and get it functioning the way it was meant to. Bulk bins, again, not something we see fail a lot as long as they were put in the right location. If they were put by a ventilation or an exhaust fan, that's where we see bulk bins start to fail. Obviously the boots do, and that's a pretty simple fix, and obviously if you've been in the pig industry for a while, you've done that. Curtains, really straightforward. Obviously if you got a lot of holes in it, that's pretty obvious what needs to happen there. But the bigger thing, I think, is understanding the adjustment on those and cycling them, and actually on a nice day running them all the way down and all the way up and watching and seeing, does it all happen the way it's supposed to? If it's happening on one end versus the other, it's putting torque on that system and it's out of adjustment. If you get it adjusted, it'll last a lot longer than if it's out of adjustment. Moving inside the building, again, these things start to get to be really obvious. Ceilings, again, if you've got a lot of rust, surface rust on there, it was a steel thing, it's a matter of time before that insulation will get heavy enough that it will pop off. The sill plate, some of these barns that are 20 years old, pigs are getting bigger, taller, they're dunging and urinating in there. That treated lumber can only last so long in that environment. So if you're seeing a lot of rotted wood there, that might be something to think about on that structure and getting some sort of remedy on that. Gas lines, really corrosion is the big thing we're looking at there. Gating is pretty self-evident. The only thing I would say about the gating is, again, it's a lot like the truss plates. A little bit of preventive maintenance would go a long way. The strongest attachment point in that whole fence line is the wall. So if you've got a loose wall bracket, you're really starting to compromise and putting a lot of stress on either the foot pads or the T-posts. So if you do a good job of at least keeping the strongest attachment point in good working order, you'll help extend the life of that gate in that barn. Feeds and feed lines, again, outside of the motors and the switch issues and the limit switches, we don't see those fail a lot. Those things have a really remarkable life on them. Again, you're going to have to switch out the motors occasionally, but the feed lines and the actual coils themselves seem to last a long, long time. Inlets, fans, controllers, again, Dr. Ramirez touched on those, but just making sure if you have actuated inlets that they're all closed when they're supposed to be. We see them get out of adjustment a lot, and so you'll have 10 in a row that are right, and then you'll have one that's way off, and so making sure that those are adjusted. And there is actually a grease cert. If you pull off that actuator cover, there is a grease cert in there, and it would be a really good thing if you could pump some grease in that at least once a year. Plumbing, electrical, again, it's really obvious. If you got a lot of corrosion, frayed open wires, that's pretty straightforward. So now we'll move in and talk a little bit about, okay, if you got to do some of these fixes, what's it going to cost and kind of what's it going to take to get that done. So first off, again, starting with your roof, if you have to re-roof a barn, and these prices, again, are the best estimate. This would include all labor and the materials to get this done. And so what I tried to do here is I just put it on a 2,400 head basis so I could back in and say, what's your per head cost in this investment? So you guys kind of know is, do I have to forego trading my lawnmower or do I have to forego trading the combine to do this fix? Again, this would be for 29 gauge G100 steel, which we would recommend certainly on a new build right now. The re-roof, though, will cost about $43,000, so you're looking at about $18 a pig space to do that. That will get you all the new steels and the screws, and they would replace, you generally don't have to replace all the purlins, but they would replace the rotten or the damaged purlins in that case. The repair truss plates. So again, if you get in that attic early enough and you see the truss plate failure, most building companies will have on file your truss package. And so they would say, if you went to them and say, hey, I got some rusted truss plates, I need a fix for that, they'll give you an engineered set of prints. It'll show you what type of plywood to use, the thickness of it, the screw pattern, where to do those, and you could do that for less than $10,000 on a minor fix. If you had to go in there and fix every single truss plate, it'd be obviously more expensive and looking at $50,000 there. Okay. Moving on, slats would obviously be the worst sort of repair you'd have to encounter. If you had to go in and do a full slat replacement on a 2400 head today, you're looking at about $160,000 to do that. The companies that do that, there's several really good contractors out there that do that. They're really efficient. They've got some really specialized equipment. They can come in, take out the gating, pull out all the slats, replace them in less than a week. It's pretty impressive how they actually do that. But that's what you'd be looking at there. And then another option, if your slats aren't too far gone and everything else is good, you just got some serious pitting, would be to do what we call a slat repair. Again, a lot of really good products out there that you can coat. This is kind of your before and after. That's going to run you, depending on the product in the surface area, about $150 to $300 to just do it around that feeder area. So you're looking at about $4.50 a pig space. Again, a good, really preventative maintenance thing that would help extend the slat life. Moving on to ceilings, kind of two options here. Most people will go with an aluminum type product, which means you got to take the steel down. You can't put aluminum against steel because of the chemical reaction. That's going to mean you're going to have to re-insulate as well. So this price would be to take the ceiling down and re-insulate the whole attic if you were to use an aluminum product. Plastic, you can put that over existing steel, so you wouldn't necessarily have to re-insulate. A little more screws have to be put into the plastic type material, but you're looking at about $14, $15 a pig space to do the new ceilings. Then moving on, gating, and this would just be kind of a standard layout. There's a lot of different ones out in the industry today, but you're looking at about $50,000 to go in and do a gate replacement. Feeders, really you've got two options, a dry type or a wet dry type feeder, which is going to run more, but looking at anywhere from $7 to $11 a pig space to do that. And that'd be assuming roughly 36 feeders in that 2,400 head barn. Bulk bins, again, not something that fails as long as we keep the lids on them and they're not in front of exhaust fans. Bulk bins last a long, long time. You will have to replace the boots, but if you were going to have to do that on a site and it was 4 bins, you're looking at about another $7 a pig space. This is one of the nice ones, an actuated air inlet. If you're not using, if you just got the damper type, I think this is one of the better upgrades that we can talk about for your bang for your buck. You can go in and get actuated inlets and controllers installed, and that's going to cost about $5 a pig space. And then lastly, your curtain replacements. Looking at about $12,000. Another number to use, rule of thumb, is about $13 a linear foot of your curtain. So however far you've got to go, and that would be dependent upon how many breaks you have in that and kind of your airspace. So moving on to the last part of my talk, I'm going to talk about new construction, some major things I think are worth considering, and then I'll finish up by talking about what new barns would cost today. So a lot really needs to be put into these barns. I think that we're building today are going to have well over a 30-year life. I think we've gotten that much better, and the materials have gotten that much better. So a lot of thought really needs to be put into, okay, this thing's going to be here for 30 years. If you take really good care of it, I think it could last 50. So first thing being location, and obviously the Coalition to Support Iowa Farmers does a really good job on helping you locate from a neighbor and an odor perspective. What I'm really talking about is location from a functionality of building the barn and the dirt work. What's really popular with grain farmers who build these is the 2 to 3 or 5 acres that they floods out 3 out of 5 years, and they can't grow corn or soybeans. I think that's a good spot for a pig barn. It really isn't, for the same reasons you can't grow corn there. So think about that, just how it lays, how much dirt's going to have to be moved to do that. The other thing to think about, and it really became evident this year, was what are your roads like around there? Anybody who worked at least in Iowa this year, with as deep as the frost went in the ground and as fast as it came out and all the rain we had some really, really difficult times getting feed trucks down these county roads. So I would put a lot of thought into understanding, okay, can I get it on a hard surface road? If I can't, can I keep it a quarter mile off a hard surface road? What's the bridges like around it? Because you're going to be running 80,000-pound semis up and down this road every day, or at least once a week. And so I think we don't think about that enough as an industry, and I think we need to spend a little more time on that. The next thing would be durability. So this is really gets down to your materials. How can I build this thing so it won't rust out in 15 or 20 years and have to come in and do a major repair? And we'll touch on some of those specifics here. The third item is people. So who's going to be working in that barn over the next 30 years? You know, labor is a big deal for this industry. So what can I do when I build it that's going to make it easier for the people working there and want to come to work and keep and retain employees? And we'll touch on a few of those things. And then lastly is the pig. My previous life, I worked in the genetics industry, and the one thing that's obvious and evident there was pigs will get bigger, they will grow faster, and if you look at how much the pig has changed since the 1990s, the buildings really need to adapt, and you need to think out, okay, what's the pig of the 2030 going to look like, and can I take that into consideration when I build that barn? This is a 2-barn site we did last year. It's a double-wide tunnel vent barn. Just a couple things I'd touch on here. You know, in the office, you know, we made sure that it had a shower and facility that could accommodate men and women. You actually have a changing room. You're not stepping out of the shower into the office. Some people aren't comfortable with that. So it's got dock high load chutes, which again, I think is a benefit to both the pig and the people. It's got a permanent wean pig load-in chute, so it can accept pigs on a trailer, not just a semi. This particular site did not have pit fans on it. We did elemental ventilation on the side. And something else that we're looking at right now and barns we're doing this year is we're narrowing up this load chute for the simple fact of getting more airspace and tunnel to get air through that barn. Again, these pigs are going to get bigger. They're going to respire more. We're going to have to get more CFMs to those pigs. So a few things to think about here. Again, this is a picture I showed earlier. It's a lot of times what we see when you have a pit failure is those beam pockets. So we've gone away from them. When we're building barns now, you can see the pocket here. We've even quit putting those on. We just go ahead and pour a column right on the end. There's a little bit more concrete, but this is way more robust, and you should never have that problem on this finisher. The other thing I would talk about is the 4-foot stem wall. The natural ventilation barns, we had to use the 2-foot stem wall just to get the airflow across the pigs. Well, when you go to a tunnel barn, a lot of customers are choosing to just extend this wall up another 2 foot. That keeps all the manure off of that sill plate. It also allows us to attach this gate all the way into concrete on all the attachment points. See, again, pigs are going to get bigger. A 320-pound pig torquing on that gate versus 20 years ago when it was 250 pounds. Again, I touched on the dock high load chutes. The pump outs, think about where you want to locate those. We've actually changed our design and we've moved one of the pump outs in front of the office. For the simple fact is this manure handling equipment's getting bigger. They like to be able to sit and see the tank when they're filling it. And if it's on the backside of an office or something, they can't see it and they got a hose out there. So we've moved a pump out up. We've also made our pump outs thicker at the bottom of them. Again, the equipment keeps getting bigger, and if you've got a 300-horse tractor and they drop that pump down in that pump out in that sump, it's just like a jackhammer. So then it gets into really the building materials that I touched on. And again, we would recommend using the 29-gauge G100. We think that's going to give you a lot longer life on that building. Same with the truss plates. Again, the 90s, a lot of barns were built with a G9 or a G60 product, and we're putting a lot of G185s, or at least giving customers the option to put G185 on that facility. Then we get to your stainless steel. We would recommend anywhere that it's going to come into contact with pigs, making it stainless steel. And this is what we would call a foot pad. That's one of the options to attach the gate to the pit. The other one is what we would call a T-post. This is a full length that runs up the spear of that gate. This is going to give you a lot more strength than this foot pad. So again, it's another thing that we think, looking to the future and what that barn is going to look like and the pigs that are going to be going through it in the next 10 years would be a good investment. In terms of feeders, I think going to a lot of the feeders have gotten much better in terms of the materials, the design, the capacities, and I think the whole industry has a feed outage problem whether they want to admit it or not. And so having the higher capacity feeder, I think, helps that situation. Certainly when you go to the wet-dry feeder, there's a water savings, and a lot of the research would show that there is a feed intake and feed efficiency advantage. Another big one, though, is, again, reduced pumping costs. It's amazing on these new barns with a wet-dry feeder how much less manure there is in that pit to have to handle. Now, obviously, it's thicker and that, but if you've got to run those big manure wagons up and down these county roads that are already in tough shape, figuring out ways that we can reduce the gallons to haul, I think is worthwhile. And then the last thing, swing gates. Again, that's what we have here. It's not a big price upgrade to do that on these barns, and it gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of how you load the barn, how you sort the barn, how you treat pigs, how you unload the barn. And we think from a staff standpoint and a pig standpoint is a nice option to have. Another consideration would be the wider alleys. Again, when those barns are built, a 250-pound pig fits down an alley much differently than a 300, 320-pound pig. LED lighting's come a long way. It's pretty much standard on everything that we would do. It really improves the lighting inside the barn, and there is certainly a cost savings to that. The last item that we started putting on some barns for customers last year is this odor control fence. And what that is, and you could really only want to do this on obviously a tunnel ventilated barn. You wouldn't do it on a natural vent. But the concept is this is really just a netting, just a plastic netting, and you can't see it, but on the back side in between the fans and this netting is what they call corona wire, aka barbed wire. And there's two strands of that running the length of this, and then there's a box over on the other side, and what's going on there is you're taking an alternating current off your 110 outlet. It's converting that to DC, and it's reducing the amperage, and it's putting out these ions through these tips of this barbed wire. And what that is going to do is it's going to attract the dust particles. Most of the odor that comes out of your fan end is carried on dust particles. So the concept is it attaches to those ions and then it sticks. It's really sticky. So you'll get dust buildup on this here. And so one, you're keeping that air from getting lofted and that dust getting lofted and hopefully reducing odor. So that is an option that we started putting on some barns last year. So my last slide, and you guys can go get some dinner and barbecue and beer. So these would be the pricing today for a turnkey 101 by 200 double wide, what we would call tunnel vent wean to finish barn, with a lot of the upgrades that we talked about there. And what we're looking at for the non-estimated costs of things that we know and we can lock in is $290 a pig space. And then our estimated items, so the things that we know you're going to incur, but we won't know it until we actually build it, is another $40. So you're looking at about, $330 a pig space to build a turnkey. And again, that would be everything start to finish on that site. And a lot of times these estimated items don't get talked about in the building process. They just kind of show up in change orders, but they're real. The rock one is really real. Depending on your distance from the quarry and that, it can be significant. And then the second one would just be, again, we don't build a lot of new ones. When we build these natural vent barns now, they're usually expansions on existing sites so they can just match up an existing natural vent barn. But we do still build some of those, and you'd be looking at a little bit less construction cost on that. So about $300 a pig space. So there's my information. And again, if you climb in your attic and you see a lot of daylight, just dial that number and we'll help you out. With that, I'll entertain any questions. Yep.
You know what the approximate cost on the ionized dust shield would be, and what maintenance is required on that on an annual or monthly basis?
Yeah. Rough numbers right now. The company we were buying them from got bought out, so I don't know if our price from last year is going to be the same, but it was about $15,000 to install and buy the equipment for that. The maintenance I've seen so far on them is these are zip tied on, and I don't think we used a big enough zip tie last year, so we've gone through and because when you get the snow load on, that's going to pop them. You got to make sure you use UV rated zip ties, so we've gone to a heavier one, and I think that'll probably solve those issues. The ongoing maintenance is in Iowa with the current weather pattern, there isn't any washing required because we're getting so damn much rain. But the thought is if we go into a drought, when you turn the barn, you'd want to stick your power wand outside there, unplug it, and knock the dust down. I will tell you, it will stick to everything back here. It doesn't just stick to this fence. Most of it does because they're blowing into it, but it sticks to the steel too.
Is that going to cause the steel to deteriorate quicker?
Yes, if you don't get it off there, sure. There's salts in that. It's no different than anything else. So it couldn't force you to have to replace that gable end stooner. I think that's a real possibility. The control unit itself is really robust. We've had some cord failures. It's literally the cord you plug your monitor into. So if one fails, you literally just get a computer cord and put it in there. There's a high voltage wire that comes off that box. It's running 30,000 volts through that. Really, really low amperage. So it's going to feel, if you touch it, it's going to feel like a weed chopper electric fence, if anybody remembers what those are. It's going to hurt bad enough you won't go back for another one. It won't kill you. But in the unit senses that and it shuts itself off. So if it senses that, it will turn itself off. But this high voltage wire, it's the electricity is trying to get outside of that. So it's really particular how we install that, and we've changed that. And I think that'll eliminate any of the issues that we had with shorting out on that. Yeah.
On the metal ceiling replacement with aluminum, any experience in just burning down the metal and sticking the aluminum under it with a gap?
I've not done it. I've just been told not to. I just, if you don't want to pull out the existing one, go with a plastic pipe product's what we would tell people. I've not done that personally.
Have you done any of those without the electricity?
No, but I think it would have some benefit because it is stopping the particles before they're getting airborne. Yeah.
Do you have any data on monitoring?
Yeah, Iowa State did a trial with Iowa Selects, put these on some barns, and the science says the manufacturer would have said you're getting a 60%. The trial they ran showed a 40% reduction in odor. They do work. I've walked on the back side of them. I mean, it is a finisher, and you're blowing air out there, but it is different on the back side of that fan or on that fence than it is if you were in between it. So about 40% is what the scientists are saying.
You mentioned you're targeting some higher CFM rates, with the bigger pigs, faster growing. What's kind of the target before going into tunnel and then?
I would defer that. I am not a ventilation expert. There might be one sitting behind you there that could answer it. I don't know. There's a couple here in the crowd, whether they want to admit it or not.
At what age of barn do you start to see slats start to go bad on you?
All over. I would say worst case, maybe there was a quality control issue with how the slat was poured and the mix and all that sort of stuff. The worst case would be probably 20 years. I think a lot of them, if it was really good QC, are making it 30. I mean, Hog Slats in the room, they would be better ones to answer that than I do. But yeah, somewhere between 20 and 30. Fair?
Yeah, there's some that have only made it 5, so.
Well, that's really. I've not done one that's 5 because that would be one mad. There'd be lawyers involved in that one, I'll bet. So, yeah.
So with the wet dry feeders, you didn't mention anything with slat savers or anything up front. Any recommendations on a new barn with wet dry?
Yeah, we got a lot of people will put not only the slat slaver but the hardener on the surface out in front of it, the epoxy. I think they're good products. Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of personal preference and what your, how you want that slat to look in 5 and 10 and 15 years. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Let's give him a